for the people of this country, for the people of my country, for young people, that is positive, that the problem is about inequality, that the problem can be fixed. And I'm going to try and build that story. I'm traveling around Europe to speak to people because I know the demand is there. I don't think it's being filled. I work hard every week putting out videos on YouTube. It's become unbelievably popular in the UK. But the last time inequality reduced in my country, it didn't just reduce in my country. It reduced all across Europe, all across the world. I think this can be fixed, but it can be fixed more easily together. The reason I'm here speaking to young people in Italy is because I want to see somebody making videos about inequality, about taxation, about fairness in Italian. I want to see people doing it all across the world. The world is going to change. The economy is going to change. But it could go in a number of directions. And it will be decided by people like you, by the young people in this country, all over the world. So I'm going to keep trying to build that new picture, that new story about economics, and I hope you do too. So I think I'll take questions on that.
So we start the question and answer session. Anybody wants to start? Please, go. I don't know if we have a mic. Yes, we have a microphone. Identify yourself. And
so, my name is Mikhail. I'm from Moldova. And about the question that the leading narrative would be that the problem is immigrants and etc. So, the aforementioned Friedman is himself an author of a quote that if you have free welfare, you cannot have free migration. So, I don't think that this is actually sustainable to invite, very unlimited amount of people and to sustain welfare state, which is the leading cause of inequality, is decline of it, since we no longer can sustain it. So that would be the question. Thank you.
I mean, personally, I think that the main cause of economic living standards falling is increasing top 1%, 0.1% inequality. That doesn't mean that I think we should have more immigration. It doesn't mean that I'm pro-immigration. I have a YouTube channel which is about economic inequality. Every week I put out a video saying inequality will rise and living standards will fall and it will cause devastation for your kids and your grandkids. It's not really, my channel is not really about immigration, but I started to see about 2 years ago an increase in the comments saying, stop talking about the billionaires, the problem is immigration. And that grew and that grew and that grew and that grew. And it reached a point where the #1 counter-argument to we should tax billionaires became, as you say, the problem is immigration. And I realized immediately, if the billionaires recognize that that is what is happening, we're going to be in big trouble. Because we will be in a situation where the main way for billionaires to keep their own tax rates low will be to aggressively spread the idea that the problem is foreigners and the problem is migrants. And I think they've recognized that. I think it's as simple as that. I'm not an economist of immigration, but I know that the billionaires are aggressively funding ideas that the problem is foreigners and migrants in order to keep their taxes low. And in basically every country in the world, you have a far-right movement funded by billionaires that says on the label, what we want is to keep immigrants out. And if you look at their tax policy, it is consistently to cut the taxes of billionaires. So, you can have high immigration, you can have low immigration. But I encourage you to look at the political parties that want to reduce immigration, look at who funds them, and look at what they're going to do to billionaire taxes. Because these guys are going to take your assets and they're going to convince you it was foreigners who did it. Thank you.
Just one information. I don't know if it works. Does it work? This morning I found out that Gary is half Italian. His family maybe was just
They were immigrants, yeah. Yeah, my mother's family migrated from Italy to England, yeah. Long time ago.
He's from Tuscany. Ma parla
It's
anche
true.
italiano, parla anche italiano.
Ah, so parlare un po', non sono molto...
No, not a question. Yes.
Hi, my name is Nihir. I'm from Turkey. So my question is, I would like to hear your opinions on the near future. So what can be done by the states to lower this inequality in the economics or maybe on immigration? So what can be done by the states in like near future, and maybe your own plans or ideas?
Yeah, it has to be about taxation policy. I really don't think there is any way to fix this without looking at taxation policy. I think people often think that what I want is to tax high-working people, high-earning workers. That's not what I want. In most of Europe, we have a tax system which taxes high-earning workers at pretty high rates, and it doesn't tax billionaires almost at all. So I worked in finance in London, and I made a few £1 million. I'm very proud of that, and I paid 50, 60%. At the same time, the Duke of Westminster, a member of the British aristocracy, inherited £10 billion, more than 3,000 times what I made, and paid nothing. This is... If you do not change that tax system, then I guarantee you, over the medium term, the billionaires will own everything, which means the workers will own nothing. It's simple as that. You know, it's an absurd tax policy. It's an absurd tax policy. And of course, when I say I want to tax the billionaires, you know, the billionaires try to convince working people that I want to tax you, which is why we use the slogan, tax wealth, not work. And people sometimes will say, oh, well, it's difficult to tax the billionaires because they will leave. To which I answer, when Russia invaded Ukraine, the British government finally decided it wanted to tax a specific group of billionaires, which was the Russian billionaires. They tried to tax Roman Abramovich, who was a very wealthy Russian billionaire living in London, who owned Chelsea Football Club. Roman Abramovich left, he went to Moscow, and Chelsea Football Club stayed in Chelsea. And the British government froze the assets. These guys, they own your country, you know. They own your country, they own this country, they own my country, and what they own is largely property and assets and buildings and land on the ground. If you tax workers and not billionaires, then the billionaires will own everything. You need to fix that tax policy. There are great people doing great work. The most obvious example is the French economist Gabriel Zucman. But you need to fix your tax policy. If you cannot tax billionaires, then very, very quickly the billionaires will own everything. So really, the battle for the future, the battle for whether people like you, young people who want to work and make money, can own assets, is entirely a battle about taxation policy.
So, my name is Osama, I'm from Morocco, and I have a question. Do you actually think that having more taxes on billionaires will actually solve the problem of economical inequality? Isn't that the solution we have been trying to do for like the last century? I mean, wouldn't it be better if we lower taxes on lower classes and other classes so they have more ability to start small and middle businesses? And this would solve the problem of economical inequality.
Yeah, I would love to reduce taxes on low-earning people and workers. That's why we talk about tax wealth, not work. But you need to fund that. You need to fund that somehow. If you cut taxes on workers without raising taxes on the very rich, then you will have to cut public services. In the UK, governments have been aggressively cutting public services for 15 years, and it's absolutely devastating the living standards of poor people. I mean, we have been trying to do it for a long time. We have been trying to tax the rich for a long time. 100 years ago, my grandmother, my English grandmother, grew up in London, in the richest city, in the richest country in the world, and 3 of her siblings died of tuberculosis, a disease of poverty. That is what happens in rich countries if you don't tax the rich. Tax policy changed in the mid-20th century. Taxes on the rich were aggressively increased, and my dad worked an ordinary job and was able to buy a house, raise 3 children in relative comfort and security, go on holidays, have a retirement. That's what happens in a rich country if you do tax the rich. In the 80s, we changed our tax policy. We stopped taxing the rich. And now working people in London, even if they earn 2-3 times average income, can't afford a home. That's what happens if you don't tax the rich. So we have been trying to tax the rich for a long time. When we fail, living standards collapse. When we succeed, living standards improve. So yeah, we've been trying it for a long time. But when the poor protect themselves, as they did in the late 20th century, then the poor have good living standards. When the poor don't, then the poor have bad living standards. Look at the history of this country, look at the history of my country, look at the history of your country. If you do not control inequality, living standards will collapse. That is a battle of taxation. When we win, then the poor can afford homes, food, heating, financial security. When we lose, they can't. The direction we are going is we are losing that battle.
So the great Italian businessman Enrico Mattei said, I don't want a rich in the poor country. He created any oil and gas company, no? So do you know the community Patriot Millionaires?
Yeah, I'm a member of that group. Yeah. And that's a group which started in the US, and now we have a big group in the UK, which is a group of millionaires who want to pay more taxes. I think it's really interesting. When I was writing my book, a book by Charles Dickens, who you probably know is a very famous British author from the 19th century, the Victorian times, I was reading a book called Hard Times. And he spoke about, at that time, the government were trying to tax the rich. And the rich were saying, if you tax us, we'll throw our factories into the sea. Listen, this is a battle which has been repeated again and again and again. And I'm not here to say that the rich are evil, because I don't think the rich are evil. I'm a rich person. I try my best not to be evil. I don't want this society to collapse. It's as simple as that. And I think the rich would be wise to agree to pay more taxes, because if the rich don't pay more taxes, then what will happen is aggressively increasing inequality, aggressively increasing political instability. Look at what is happening politically in Europe. Look what is happening politically in America. I'm not trying to redistribute wealth. I'm trying to stop the redistribution of wealth that is happening. If we don't do anything, inequality will get worse and worse and worse and worse. Living standards will get worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. And political insecurity will grow and grow and grow and grow. And it's very difficult for me to look at what is happening now in Britain, in the US, in Europe, and not be reminded of what was happening 100 years ago. And I don't want us to repeat those same mistakes again, which is why I'm here. I think we can do it differently this time.
Good morning, I'm Sofia, I'm from Italy. Since you're from the United Kingdom, I wanted to ask you something more specific about your country. So United Kingdom a few years ago left the European Union. So I wanted to ask you if the Brexit phenomenon has had any specific influence on the economic inequality which you study and which you talk about. And if so, I wanted to ask you which kind of influence it had, if it worsened or the situation remained the same. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think Brexit has improved living standards in the UK, but I think most economists would agree with that. How has it affected inequality specifically? The main thing that Brexit has done to the economy of the UK is it has changed the demographic makeup of immigration into the UK. It's significantly decreased European migration to the UK, and it's significantly increased non-European migration to the UK. But the truth is, inequality was increasing in both the UK and in Europe, both before and after Brexit. I think that's the truth. The main thing I think that Brexit did was it aggressively divided the population of the UK, which has made it increasingly difficult for people like me to do the work that I do. Because very, very wealthy people put a lot of money into funding the idea that the rich shouldn't pay taxes. And the only way to oppose that is really a united working class. And when Brexit happened, you know, my brother was very, very anti-Brexit, and my dad was quite pro-Brexit, and it was quite classic. And I saw division in my family, and it really reminds me of what is happening now with the aggressive growth of the far right and anti-immigrant rhetoric in the UK. Again, I see it really, really dividing the working class. Things like Brexit, things like anti-immigrant rhetoric, which is not just happening in the UK, it's happening here, it's happening everywhere. The real big problem, from my perspective, when I look at how can we improve financial inequality, improve financial living standards, is they aggressively divide the working class. And if you have, when I say the working class, I don't just mean the poor. I mean really anybody outside the top 10%. If that group is divided, then they will be very easily defeated by the rich. So I think that the worst thing is it creates division, and I would really encourage British people, but also Italians, to be really, really wary of political narratives which divide the working class in a context where the working class are broadly losing economically to the very rich.
Okay, I'm Alicia. First of all, I wanted to thank you for your talk. It was really inspiring. I wanted to ask you whether you think that the public sector or the private sector will, at the end, make a difference in this in the fight against inequality. Because I remember that during the 2008 crisis, at the end, the economic stabilization happened after the Mario Draghi whatever it takes talk. So that was a big push for the European Central Bank and for the European institutions to actually take into their hands what was only left to the private sector. So at the end, do you think that the private or the public sector will be more influenced, will be more important in this fight against inequality?
I think that there's a lot that the public sector can do. I think at the moment, yeah, I did like a tour of Europe earlier this year, and what struck me was like how similar the political situation was in basically every country, which is you have this surging far right based on this anti-immigrant sentiment, and really most other political groups are kind of flailing in a sense. They don't really know what to do. The centre and the centre-left has a tendency to want to do things like monetary intervention, like we saw from Draghi, or to borrow and spend more. I think really, if we talk about the public sector, there's a really interesting reluctance from all of these public sector groups, the centre-left, the centre-right, the left, a reluctance to talk directly about distribution, and a really strong urge, it seems, to try to fix this problem with technocratic fixes that do not address directly the distributional problems. And I don't think that will work. I think you see these stopgap measures, which basically involve like aggressively increasing government debt. I think that will only work for so long. You know, you're seeing now in the UK a situation where the government like basically can't borrow more money. The financial markets won't allow it. That will happen here very, very soon. You know, and eventually it will happen in the US, it will happen in Germany. And that is what happens when you try to fix with borrowing a problem which needs to be fixed with tax. And I think, unfortunately, the public sector, until it wakes up to the fact that distribution matters, is going to just drive itself further and further into debt. And that is going to play right into the hands of the far right. But I'll try to talk to them. And the fact is, if they don't fix that, they will lose to the far right again and again in every country in Europe. So I will try as best as I can to get politicians talking about distribution and inequality again. At the moment, there are not many politicians talking about that. And in the meantime, I will keep talking about it. And we will try to replace the politicians as best we can. But I think I've said a lot of things which are quite pessimistic. Politics will change. Politics will change. You're young. Most of the people here are young. Politics will change aggressively in the course of our lives. I will try my best to build an international movement which brings distribution back onto the agenda. We can reduce inequality. We can bring living standards up. Look at the enormous increase in quality of life in this country, in my country, between the first half and the second half of the 20th century. We can achieve that again, but to do it, we need to do the same thing that they did, which was significantly increase the taxation share of the very rich.
Hi, I'm Giorgio. I study economics and policy evaluation here in Rome. And in the book, you talk about most economists being trained on representative agents models. So everything is an average that basically leads to not talking about inequality. And to be fair, now we have a course on economics of inequality, which I'm writing a thesis on. So in your opinion, do you see some change in the academic world about inequality? And if so, do you believe it's still a viable tool to change the current narrative about inequality? Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I did my undergrad at the London School of Economics, 2005 to 2008, maths and economics. Then I did a 2-year master's at Oxford, 2017 to 2019. On that master's course, there was no discussion of inequality at all. It was a 2-year master's. There were a lot of optional courses. I couldn't even find any optional module on inequality. That was 5 years ago. But, you know, this is Oxford University, so the situation was pretty bad even back then. I was very, very disappointed with academic economics. I was very disappointed, especially with Oxford. But there is space to change. There is space to change. The fact that you're able to study the economics of inequality now here in Rome, that's great. That's great. I think academic economics has to play a part in this. I think it's a difficult subject to study at the moment, especially if you want to do inequality. But we see people like the French economists Thomas Piketty and Gabriel Zucman doing great work. I think it's very, very, very important that we have young people studying economics, trying to push the subject towards being more sensible and realistic about inequality and pushing inequality into the center. So yeah, if you can stand it, keep studying economics and try and make inequality more important.
Okay. My name is Aslı and I'm from Turkey, and it was mentioned that you're from East London, which is one of the most gentrified neighborhoods in all of Europe, maybe all of the world. I wanted to ask what have you personally seen this gentrification's consequences, and also how gentrification affects inequality and how can it be tackled?
Yeah, so inner East London is quite gentrified. Outer East London, where I'm from, has kind of turned into a slum, really. So there's this. I think Europe is changing, is in the process of changing from being a relatively equal middle-class society towards being the kind of unequal elite society, which is much more common in places like Latin America, in most of Asia, perhaps in Turkey to some degree relative to Europe. And when the distribution of wealth changes in a place, the physical shape of the country changes. You know, a middle-class society wants to provide a lot of good quality middle-class housing, middle-class restaurants, middle-class cafes, middle-class bars and shops. An elite city looks like one tiny, extremely wealthy center surrounded by slums. And I think you cannot stop your country from changing in that way if you do not stop the distribution from changing. You know, you go to any big city in Latin America, that is what it looks like. It has a tiny, super elite center surrounded by slums. And, you know, London was a middle-class city. Now it is becoming an unequal city. Unequal cities want a small amount of incredibly luxury housing and a large amount of incredibly low-quality housing. You know, and that is the way that it's going to go. So whether your city gentrifies or not depends on where you live. You know, I'm sure people in the sort of the poorer parts of Rome, just like in the poorer parts of London, are not seeing gentrification. They're seeing slumification. But the big problem that you have, and I would encourage you people to be aware of this because you're students studying at good universities, I guess, is often the economic conversation takes place between the people who live in the gentrified areas and do not see the slums. So, you know, wherever you're from, wherever you live, wherever you're going to go back to after you finish your studying, I would encourage you to go to where the poor people live and see what life is like there. Because we're in this situation where all of the economists are rich and they think life is getting better. And I think what you see is this real division between the rich and the poor, which you see in places like Latin America. I've never been to Turkey, but I'm sure in the big cities of Turkey, you have a similar situation. Some areas will be phenomenally rich, and I'm sure that they are. But where ordinary people live is poor. So really, to be honest, you know, my concern is not so much gentrification, because the gentrified bits are the nice bits. my concern is what happens to the people who can't afford to live there.
Hello, I'm Francesca and I'm from Italy. And my question was, okay, so we're all, I mean, almost all of us here are young, ambitious people, and most of us want to make money. So my question is, why would us change our minds and think more about inequality and our goal should be that and not the one about making money? Is it just for a morality thing? And also, don't you think that you were able to reach this kind of opinion on inequality because you had the chance to have money yourself? So shouldn't we, I don't know, bet on making money first and then do the rest? Is it just a morality thing or there are economic reasons to? Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I would say don't do it. Go, get the good job, make the money, be ambitious. When you're young, that's a great thing to do. And also, I don't know what your financial situation is, but you live in a difficult world now. Unless you come from a rich family, you kind of need to do it. You need to go. You need to make some money. If you want to have a family of your own one day, you need to make quite a lot of money. So, I would never tell anybody, don't go do it. Don't go make money. Don't be ambitious. Get the best job you can, make as much money as you can, do as well as you can, learn as much as you can, see things, experience things, develop yourself. But if you're able to get some success and get some money and get some financial security, do something to help protect the society that you live in. Of course, the problem I have is once people get in and they make that money, I get messages from people I used to work with in finance all the time. Oh, it's great the work that you do, keep doing it, but they're not quitting their jobs to come help, And I'm not telling anybody you need to quit your job. What I'm saying is we exist at a time of extreme political and economic volatility. And if you are able to make that money and that financial security to protect yourself, your family, your future, the moral responsibility at that point on protecting your society falls upon you. Because if the people who are financially secure do not protect the financial security of their society, then who will? Because the poor, they're busy. They don't have a lot of free time. They don't have a lot of excess resources. So go do it. And when I was young, I did the same thing. I went and I made the money and I traveled the world and I succeeded in my career. But then when I made the money, I came back to protect the people that grew up in the country I grew up in. So the big thing I would like to say is, you don't have to choose. You as an individual do not have to choose between protecting yourself and protecting your country. You are big enough to do both. So do both.
Okay. Hello, my name is Tanjima. I'm from Bangladesh. And you've previously mentioned about how the city, which is called Elite, is surrounded by slums. So I would like to do a little previous story about where I'm from, Bangladesh, and you're from England, which used to be a part of Indian subcontinent. And your country, England, has been ruled the subcontinent for 200 years, and not to mention have kind of looted the Indian subcontinent. And ironically or non-ironically, the Indians are owner of 50% or majority of the properties in England. However, the normal citizens of Britain has been complaining about this inequality and also about jobs. So I would like to know your views on that, about the Indians and the people from these South Asia is becoming richer and the normal people of Britain is complaining about jobs and the normal problems in the economics. Thank you.
Yeah, so the area I grew up in, Ilford in East London, is an extremely South Asian area. So I went to schools that were 80-90% South Asian. So I grew up basically completely surrounded by South Asians. British South Asians, of course, born and raised in Britain. It's funny in a way because in a sense, I am kind of culturally British South Asian because all of my friends growing up were British South Asian. And if it wasn't for the fact that I grew up in this kind of British South Asian community, I probably never would have gotten the job that I got because all of the information that I got, sort of what uni you should go to, what you should study, came from my British Indian friends, basically. And, you know, as has been mentioned, you know, my mother's family is Italian and migrated to England from Italy, and then I grew up surrounded by migrants. So migration is a big part of my story, and I feel very close to the British Asian community. And it hurts me a lot to see growing racism, which I think is happening in England. I'm sure it's happening here. It's even happening back in India, to be honest. Because for me, growing up with different people from different places is a big part of who I am. And increasingly in Europe, we live in multicultural cities, especially the big cities. And it's not easy to live in a multicultural city, you know, because racism is a thing and it happens everywhere. I'm sure it happens here. I'm sure it happens in Bangladesh. And that is being exploited by the far right to make people hate each other and to divide the working class. Racism is a thing. It's growing everywhere. We need to find ways to deal with that and unite across these borders, across these differences. If we can't do that, we're going to be in for a really difficult time, and racism is going to grow and grow and grow. And when I say that, that doesn't mean at all that I don't think you should speak about problems that you face as a Bangladeshi living where you live. I don't think you should stop speaking about historical problems. But we do need to find ways to connect to each other, to understand each other, and to stand together with each other, because we are going to live in increasingly difficult economic and political times. And if we are divided, things can get really, really bad. You know, things, you know, look at history, look at what's happened in this country, in this continent, in other places. If we allow racism to grow and grow and grow, it can be a big problem. And we need to find ways to deal with that. And, you know, I'm not an expert on race, I'm an economist. But economically, the people of Europe have a lot in common, regardless of what race they are. So I think we do need to find ways to unite based on that.
So my question is that if we think that the states manage to tax the extreme rich people, billionaires, in the way that they should have been taxed, what do you think the job market will look like? So wouldn't be a negative effect to the working class? And this is the first part. And the second part about the middle class. I'm from Turkey, and I believe that there's no more middle class in Turkey anymore. People are extremely rich or extremely poor to not even afford their livings, their houses. So do you think it's really believable to achieve this middle class again?
I mean, we did it. We did it before. You know, I spoke about, you know, I'm a big fan of Charles Dickens, this British author. You know, he lived in Britain in the 19th century when Britain was the richest place in the entire world. And look at the level of poverty and inequality that he describes in his books. You know, I speak about the terrible poverty that my grandparents lived in when they were kids in the richest city, in the richest country in the world. And in just 50 years, you know, from the 1920s to the 1960s, the 1970s, this enormous increase in living standards for ordinary people across Europe, not just in the UK, but across Europe, in the US, in Japan. It's amazing what they achieved. And not only did they achieve that, but they did that with no historic precedent. You know, these people came back from the Second World War saying, we are going to demand good quality housing, education, healthcare, food, leisure time. And they got it. And that didn't come out of nowhere. That came from hundreds of years of class-based struggle and solidarity. But they did it. They did it, you know. The situation now, you might look at it and you think it's bad. It was a lot worse 100 years ago. A lot worse 100 years ago. And look how much improvement they achieved in 50 years. And that, you know, that didn't come out of nowhere. That was because of the struggle of our grandparents and our great-grandparents. So, you know, if you feel like there's no way to make things better, look at history. Look at history. What history teaches us is that if we do not protect our societies, terrible things can happen. Things can get much worse. But what it also teaches us, if we stand together and we demand improvements and we work together to achieve them, things can improve enormously as well.
Okay, one question there, and then that's it.
Thank you. Thank you, Gary. Very interesting. For the 16 years in a row, I'm participating to Festival della Diplomazia. And I must say that this morning it's it's amazing. I'm not used to that kind of audience. I am the Secretary General of the Italian Maritime Cluster. We represent the maritime industry. So I would say rich people. And I just wanted to say one thing, that the world is changing. It's a certainty for let's say, this sector. We are in the midst of the fourth industrial revolution. We are in the midst of the, let's say, ecological energy transition. This industry is committed. Since Paris Agreement in 2015, we have a dream that we will be all carbon neutral by 2050. We all committed. This industry has decided, with the banks, because the banks at a certain time have decided to be at the table, to bet that we have to change that world. It cannot go anymore like this. So it's true that there is, let's say, we have to find the right balance between the three dimensions of sustainability, the environmental dimension, social dimension, we have been talking about that this morning, and the economic one. And after the European Green Deal, decarbonization, digitalization, circularization of all the activities of the economy in Europe. Now, Gary, what is important too, and you mentioned, someone here mentioned the Draghi report, that competitiveness also has to be taken into consideration. We have to concile, let's say, sustainability and competitiveness. I mean, in order also to ensure that the redistribution of wellness among. So the spirit, the Robin Hood approach, it has always been discussed during since the beginning of the world. It's true that we have to find the right balance. So I think that it's important this morning that your testimony is quite important, and I think that we have really to be able to dialogue between those, and it's good what your testimony is very important, but I think that now we need recipes, as we said that, in order not to, it's true to put on the table the contrast, but we have to bring solutions also.
Okay. Question there, and then we are...
Do you want to answer quickly?
Yes.
Yeah, so if you want solutions, I think the best person to talk to is Gabriel Zucman in France. For me, when I talk about reducing inequality, there's two parts to it, and I always view it as there's two separate sides. There is one, winning the public support, and there is two, designing the perfect technical solutions. We have to win both of those battles. So I'm an economist, and I would love to be sitting in a room somewhere designing the perfect wealth tax. The reason I'm not doing that is because we don't have the public support for it. So, I don't want to be a YouTuber. I don't want to be famous. I had to teach myself how to write a book because I was forced to move from being an economist into being a public campaigner. Once we have enough public support that I think we can get the wealth tax through, then I will work on the design. Unfortunately, I am just a YouTuber. We need campaigners and designers. I will focus on design when we have won the campaign. But there are guys working on design, and the best guy is Gabriel Zucman in France, and I think he's doing a great job, so have a look at what he's doing.
Hello, thank you very much. It was very interesting. As an economist, do you have an idea of how far the billionaires should be taxed to regulate the situation? On which financial parameters do you base your analysis to estimate the tax? And the second question is, as a millionaire, would you really accept to be taxed like that? Because the real goal here is to make the rich people accept the tax. So how do you do that?
Yeah, I think the most important thing is to simply consider the wealth distribution. So, we exist in a situation where rich people increase their wealth by something like 7, 8, 9% a year. And here in Europe, most economies are growing at 1% a year. So if we have economies that are growing at 1%, while the rich are increasing their wealth at 9%, it is basically a mathematical certainty that other groups in society will be losing their wealth to the rich. And you are seeing that. Look at government wealth, You know, look at working class wealth. You know, in my parents' generation, it was normal for poor people to own houses. That's not normal anymore. Look at the massive increase in debt, of mortgage debt of the middle class. So I think if you allow the wealth of the rich to grow at such a rate that it is aggressively squeezing out the wealth of other groups in society, you will inevitably see these kind of consequences which we're seeing now. The most obvious one at the moment is the collapse of government wealth, which is progressively leading to the shutting down of the government welfare states that our grandparents fought so hard for. We campaign in my country for wealth taxes of 1 to 2%. The truth is that would not be enough to stop that from happening. It would only slow it down. I think realistically, if you want to stop the rest of society from getting poorer, you would need much higher rates of tax. But I'm a realist. I campaign for what we can get. We're looking for 1 to 2%. Listen, I'm not a politician. I'm not ideological. I simply want to stop poverty from exploding. You need to find ways to tax them significantly more. Significantly more. If you could do it enough such that the rest of us stopped getting poorer, I would probably accept that. But I would also accept less. We need something.
So it's me again. So I have a question. If we look at one of the the example that you gave about England after the Second World War, and for example you can say also France, we can say that the moment where they have the example of the social state that provides services were the moment of colonialism. After the Second World War, the British Empire had been collapsing. So they started losing their colonies and their source of money. And at the 80s, when the laborers and the government and Margaret Thatcher became prime minister, it was literally the end of the British Empire. No more Nigeria, no more India, no more any other colonies except Hong Kong and some micro colonies. So can we say that the social state could not be accomplished without...
The next session is at 1:45. You have to be at the Palazzo Valentini. Somebody will tell you where it is. We'll have a session, question time with the ambassador, and I hope that you will be punctual. Now I would like to ask you a round of applause for Gary, but before that, before that, I thought normally you give flowers, you give a tar, just one plaquette for as an acknowledgement of his intervention. But what do you give to a millionaire? So I took a portion of raspberries, maybe blackberries, hoping that you enjoy it. So, please, if you want to continue to talk with him, do it outside. You bring him to a coffee, to have a coffee, whatever. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
And don't forget the book. Don't forget the book. At the moment.
Look, this is the guy right now. Yeah. I've been following it closely.
Yeah. I couldn't recognize you because I've never seen you personally, but I follow your videos.
That's me.
If it's possible to ask you now, how would I like